Bringing the panel, Molly Ball, Anna Navarro, Ed Martin, Asha Rangappa, Brian Lanza, and Michael Zeldin. Michael, let's just start with you. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts on this. Given your experience with Mueller, what stands out to you today based on all that's happened?
Well, what stands out most is that the President of the United States cannot go under oath, that his disconnected stories over the course of these months that we've been following this create for him the possibility of a perjury trap if he goes under oath. And I think Ty Cobb and John Dowd know this. I think that that's his personal greatest liability.
Can he avoid going under oath at some point?
No, probably not, but they'll try to stretch it out as long as they possibly can so that they know as much as they possibly can so they can create a narrative that hopefully he can stick to as a witness.
Are you saying he can't go under oath because he's not being truthful, or he can't go under oath because he just may not recall, or he doesn't have the ability to recall all of these moving parts?
I think he can't tell the truth. That's what I'm saying. I think that he can't go under oath from a legal jeopardy standpoint because he doesn't tell the truth with respect to what he knows. And that is a problem. And if you're Ty Cobb or John Dowd, you have to make sure that the president is protected. And the way you protect him is to keep him from testifying under oath if possible, or at least have him testify under oath at the very end, so when you know as much as you can about what people have said, and that you can create a narrative that you can stick to that's truthful.
Asha, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that the fact that they're getting Kushner's take on what happened with the Comey firing makes it pretty clear that Mueller has an obstruction case on the president and he intends to build it. Remember, when obstruction is when you take an action, which may in itself actually be legal, but you do it for corrupt reasons. Okay, you do it for reasons that you know are wrong. And that's difficult to prove. It's hard to get into somebody's mind. Mueller is many things, but he's not a mind reader. So he's going to go to things that were said and done and written before and after. And this is an administration that has very loose fingers, okay? I mean, we know just from these Russian emails or whatever that they are not careful about what they've been writing.
Seems like loose lips also given all the leaks.
And loose lips. I mean, we know that the president himself tweets that half of the obstruction case has been created by the president himself against himself. So, you know, this tells
So Kushner is of interest because not only, I mean, his entire role in the campaign and financial dealings of his own that may be an issue, but in terms of the Comey firing and also on the flight where they're crafting the letter
That's
for
right.
Donald Trump Jr.
So,
He's involved.
So here's where the Russia ties come in. If there are connections between Kushner and Russia and Don Jr. and all of these things, that creates a motive for Trump to want to make this go away. So again, those contacts will help bolster Mueller's case of obstruction against the president, as will any, you know, financial shenanigans that may have been happening in the past. But all of these give a vested interest on the part of the president to want this investigation to go away, which will help Mueller in his obstruction case.
Well, just to follow up on that, to my point that the president is having trouble telling the truth, the Air Force One story that was put forth initially about the June 9th meeting was just not true. Mm-hmm. Right. And if he said that under oath to Mueller, the initial story that I had nothing to do with it, I don't know anything about it, that would be a lie. That would be an actionable false statement for which Papadopoulos tells us you could go to jail for several years. That's the greatest risk for the president.
Ed?
Well, I'm almost stunned to listen to this. I mean, we're speculating about things that didn't happen, might happen. You've got him on perjury charges. You know, today's news is that we have a junior staffer who says in a meeting that he was big-timing, trying to say, I'll set up a meeting with Putin, and everybody said, don't bother. I don't know if you've ever, anybody here has been on a campaign, Anna has, when you, especially a big campaign, she's been on bigger ones. There's lots of people in the room trying to big time and say, hey, I'll do this, I'll do that, I've got donors or whatever. So we're taking that and we're going all the way forward to the president.
How do you know he's big time? Because he actually did have contact with
Well, everybody, you can see it. And they've all said that no one did anything with it. The fact that it's not remembered by anybody is an indication that this was a guy who was trying to. I mean, my argument is
seems
as
like
plausible.
it's remembered by this guy J.D. Gordon, who is sitting there.
Right, but my argument is plausible. Okay, he's another junior staffer, but I mean the fact that Sessions and Trump don't believe it is as likely as this idea that they sat there and said, "Oh my goodness, let's go to Russia." Oh no, we won't tell anyone about it. I mean, they don't remember that conversation of some staffer, and now we're all the way back to some kind of convoluted theory of perjury. I've never heard anyone talk about that. The president
does not tell the truth, and under oath has a history of under oath not telling the truth. I mean, in his lawsuit against Tim O'Brien, I mean, he was demonstrably lying, dozens of times.
Well, but whatever it is in the past that we want to point to that says now, therefore, that what's true is a Russia conspiracy, there's no evidence of Russia impacting the election. There's now a kind of a hunt on by Mueller to think that Jared Kushner. I mean, look, at the interview before, I think it was very important, Anderson, on the show with Schwartz. He said Mueller will get him. Not on anything to do with Russia. He'll just get him on something from his past, financial. If that's the goal stated by Mueller or anybody else, that's the problem, right? We're in this is a coup of the American people's election.
Anna?
Well, first of all, Mueller has not stated that, right? So when we're talking about speculation, that is speculation on your part. I have been on big campaigns. I've never seen coffee boys be able to have direct communication with campaign managers or sit around the table with the top executives, the top echelon of the campaign. Look, I think what this tells us is, as we sit here trying to read tea leaves, is just how thorough, how focused, how concentrated Bob Mueller is. He's not paying attention to the noise around him. He has amassed an impressive entourage, an impressive team of the best prosecutors and investigators in this country. He is peeling away the layers of this onion, and somebody's going to end up crying.
Well, I mean, as a non-legal expert, right, not a prosecutor, not a lawyer, I have no idea what, if any, case Mueller may be trying to build. But from the standpoint of a political observer and a Trump observer, it's very clear that some of Trump's most sensitive areas are under the microscope right now. And that's part of what a prosecutor does, is put pressure on areas that he knows are sensitive, right? So the fact that he's looking into old financial dealings, things from long before the campaign, and the White House will tell you, look, all of this stuff that Manafort and Gates are being indicted for is way before they ever took up with Trump. That's true. But what Trump may be hearing from that is they're looking at old tax returns.
But it was also still, by the way, allegedly
money
going on during the campaign. I mean, there were efforts to, there was outreach to Russian oligarchs about briefings on the campaign and things like that.
But the activity in the indictment, for the most part, the stuff that they're looking at with the activities in Ukraine had nothing to do with the Trump campaign itself.
Molly, for the part about the Republican convention that Manafort managed, where the Republican platform, specifically on Ukraine, was changed to benefit the benefactors of Paul Manafort.
We got to take
so there's a connection there.
We got to take a quick break. We're going to have more with the panel. I want to get Ryan in on this as well. The president made newest remarks to a radio station tonight. We'll play you those, and later new remarks from the president on immigrants after this week's attack here and the controversy they may be causing ahead. We'll talk about that. He lamented his limited options.
The saddest thing is that because I'm the President of the United States, I am not supposed to be involved with the Justice Department. I'm not supposed to be involved with the FBI. I'm not supposed to be doing the kind of things that I would love to be doing. And I'm very frustrated by it.
Back now with the panel. Brian, we didn't get to hear from you. What do you make of all the day's developments today?
I guess there's three. We'll go one by one. The Jared, what we learned about Jared is that he is fully cooperating. He volunteered the information, same information he's volunteered to all the congressional committees looking into this Russia stuff. He's been transparent, and I think that's what you want. That's not certainly somebody who's hiding anything. That's somebody who is focused on the president's agenda.
Although a number of his declaration forms did have to be amended numerous times.
Sure, and others will be amended as they go forward with other people. I mean, the fact is he amended them. He didn't say no. He didn't stick to whatever was there. He clearly acknowledged that a mistake was made, and he amended them. He didn't say anything different than that. And I think that's what we have to look at. As for whether the president should go on, whether he should be put through asked questions by the investigator, I think the president knows what the stakes are, and I think he's going to answer all those questions honestly. I think, as somebody who worked on the campaign, there was, I sort of sit here and I get, it's rather obnoxious to hear everybody talk about this Russia collusion when you know the facts just don't bear out. When we know the fact that there was only one campaign that hired a foreign national that coordinated with the Russians to get involved in this campaign, and that was the Clinton campaign. You can't deny those facts. Now you have Papadopoulos.
But were you involved with Cambridge Analytica and their conversation? So you don't know what went on there.
You're right. I don't know what went on there, but we
so
do know.
And on Air Force One, when they wrote that letter,
hired a foreign
but on Air Force One
to coordinate with the Russians.
Right.
That's what we do know. So
but on Air Force One, you were not on Air Force One when that conversation about coming up with a reason for Donald Trump Jr. So there's a lot going on.
But neither was anybody.
But I'm
on the
talking
panel.
about my campaign experience, and I'm talking about the facts that exist right now.
Right.
And so the facts the facts are what they are. You have a lot of sort of conjecture of what the Trump campaign did or what the Trump campaign didn't. You have a vendor who reached out to Assange, who we didn't know anything about it, reached out and Assange sort of turned him down. But when you look at compared to what else exists, is we have one campaign.
But were you aware during the campaign that Papadopoulos had this conversation with the Russian professor and had been in contact with Paul Manafort about it?
No.
Okay, so there was stuff going on in the campaign that other people would not be aware.
Yes, but let's look at what the facts are. We know that Papadopoulos, George Papadopoulos, he's now a convicted felon. He's a convicted liar. He lied to the FBI. It's not like nobody knows not to lie to the FBI. There's been enough information out there that this investigation is going on that everybody's going to say the way that Mueller's going to get you is by lying to the FBI, and he still chose to lie.
See,
so you got to go to judgment.
Why would George Papadopoulos lie to the FBI? I mean, Michael, you've worked with Mueller. Why? I mean, anybody who's watched a cop show and knows that,
right?
Well,
I haven't been watching Matlock.
I think that he thought, I'm reading into his mind, which I'm not very good at, but I think that he thought that he could either, one, get away with it, or two, thought that he was protective of the institution that he worked for and may want to work for, because it makes no sense objectively. Why would you lie when the FBI asks you a question? So he had to have some rationale for it. And usually, I think it's because they think they'll get away with it.
It might have been because he thought he was a small fish. In this big pond where there's so many people with much bigger names and much bigger roles that are being taken a look at. Now, one of the interesting aspects about the Jared Kushner angle is that they can't deny Jared Kushner, right? They deny practically everybody else. Papadopoulos, because, his name just rolls off the tongue. Oh, no, we don't know who he is. He was a coffee boy. Manafort, oh, he was, he had a minor role. He was just around for a few months. Rick, who's that one? Rick who? Sure. With Jared Kushner, you can't deny Jared Kushner.
Can I make a comment on what we heard the president say in that interview? I think it's very important. I think it's a kind of a setup for what we may see. Schwartz said it. We're coming towards a crisis, I suspect, at least a crisis of understanding. If the President of the United States is not in charge of the Justice Department, if he's not in charge of the Attorney General, if he's not in charge of that, then no one is. And we're going to have J. Edgar Hoover on steroids going forward. And my point is,
do you want the President of the United States to be able to?
I want the President
thwart the course of justice.
No, it's not the course of justice. I want him to be the President of the executive branch. It's a little bit like today when we're going to the next subject.
So you don't want the FBI to be independent, or
they're not
Justice
independent.
Department.
They're not independent. That's
Ed,
not
I think
that way.
Ed, I think you can get you might be able to get exile in Cuba, maybe Venezuela, even the Philippines, if you want that kind of dictatorship.
That's
you
not
want
a dictatorship. That's exactly the opposite.
Of course it is.
Exactly
with what you're saying, you want the President of the United States to be in charge of the FBI in terms of getting involved with investigations and DOJ.
I want the Constitution.
Well, I will tell you that it's very scary, particularly when you have a president that goes on vendettas and that has a tantrum.
Anderson, very quickly. The IRS, there was a big question. The IRS targeted people when Obama was in that were in conservative groups. That was shown to be somewhat true, right? That is Obama's. That's Obama. Somewhat true.
Mostly false.
But I mean, okay, so one infringement on people's rights is okay with you, but not mostly true. But let me finish.
Then let me respond.
Okay, but either we have a constitution that allows an election to be meaningful, or we have a country run by bureaucrats. We have a country run by the deep state. I don't think we do. I think we have a...
So anybody, I mean, so you want any administration that comes in to be able to determine who should get investigated, you don't want there to be a permanent class of professionals who work for the FBI, who work for the Department of Justice.
Ultimately, when the FBI does something wrong and when the Justice Department does something wrong, who's responsible for that? Who is accountable for that? I mean, these are appointed officials. Right. So you go to the elected official who's accounted for that.
Okay, Mike,
that's the process. That's our Constitution.
Right. So the president is in charge of the executive branch. And with respect to policy, he sets policy for the Justice Department and for the FBI. With respect,
It's not the Constitution.
yes, that's
No,
the
it's
that.
not.
Okay, well, let him finish. Let him finish.
Go ahead.
That is the manner in which, by policy for 50 years, the president interfaces with the Bureau and with the Justice Department and all other branches of the executive with respect to defining the policy of the executive branch. What he cannot do by policy is interfere with specific criminal cases. And what the president's MAL interview seemed to lament was that he couldn't do that. No one prevents him from running the executive branch as a policy matter. But policy and good judgment and good government prevents him from interfering in particular criminal matters, especially when he and his family are members of the interrogated.
So let's continue this discussion. It's an important one. We'll pick it up right after the break.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We have breaking news tonight. It is a landmark in the Russia investigation. Let's go right to CNN's Evan Perez and Pamela Brown. Pam, what have you learned?
Anderson, we've learned that a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. on Friday approved the first charges in the investigation led by special counsel Robert Mueller. This is according to sources briefed on the matter. The charges are still sealed under orders from a federal judge at this hours. And Anderson, we're told that plans were prepared Friday for anyone charged to be taken into custody possibly as soon as Monday, these sources said. It's unclear exactly what these charges are against the indictment. The indictment is under seal. A spokesman for the special counsel's office declined to comment on this story. And as you know, Anderson, Mueller was appointed in May to lead the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. elections. And he was given broad authority under the mandate given to him by Rod Rosenstein. So this is a significant development in the investigation. Top lawyers who are helping to lead the Mueller firm, the probe, we should say, including veteran prosecutor Andrew Wiseman, were seen today entering the courtroom at the D.C. federal court where the grand jury meets to hear testimony in the Russia investigation. And reporters present saw a flurry of activity at the grand jury room, but officials made no announcement. But we are learning today, Anderson, that the grand jury approved the first charges in the Mueller investigation.
So just to be clear, Pam, we don't know what the charges are at this point, and we don't know who has been charged.
That's correct. We have ideas of who has been charged, but we are not naming those people. We don't believe that they have actually been notified yet. Typically what happens is the grand jury will approve an indictment. It'll stay under seal, and then they will go through a certain process that takes a few days or a couple of days to get the arrest warrant and so forth before perhaps the attorney is called asking for that person, for the attorney to have their clients turn themselves in. So we believe that may be at play because we are told, again, as early as Monday, possibly Monday or perhaps beyond, that is when we may see some law enforcement activity related to these indictments under seal, Anderson.
Evan, can you say or do we know if it's more than one person?
Well, Anderson, we believe it's more than one person, but again, they have not been notified, and that's one of the things we were trying to do today. We were working on this story for several hours as we were trying to contact some of the lawyers of the people involved. Some of them did not get back to us, so we'll be continuing to work on that over the weekend.
Okay.
But, you know, it is something that obviously, because it's under seal, it's actually one of the more difficult parts of this story to cover.
So, Evan, to bring charges like this, who would have to approve them?
Well, Rod Rosenstein is the Attorney General here who's handling this, who's overseeing this investigation. He's the Deputy Attorney General, but for this case, because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is recused, he is acting as the Attorney General, and so he oversees this, and he has the right to review the charges, and if he thinks that they're not appropriate, he can tell Robert Mueller that he doesn't approve them. He can reject them. So at this stage, Anderson, we don't know exactly what interaction investigation there was, but we do believe that given the regulations that govern what Mueller is doing, that he would have had to give Rod Rosenstein notice about this and at least, told him what he was preparing to do, and given Rosenstein the chance to say you can't do this if he believed it was not appropriate.
Would that information be given to the White House as well, or be given to Attorney General Jeff Sessions since he had recused himself?
No, not under this circumstance. Under this circumstance, it would be something that that Rosenstein, who is, for all intents and purposes, the Attorney General for this case, he is the one, the ultimate authority to oversee this, and it would not, under these circumstances, be notified to the White House, simply because, Anderson, this is a case that involves so many people at the White House, of course, including the president.
So, Pam, how significant, let's put this in perspective, and again, we don't know what the charges are or who has been charged or haven't confirmed it or we're not saying it. How significant a development is this in the Russia investigation?
It's a landmark development. I mean, this is what, in a sense, we've been waiting to see if this will happen, if Robert Mueller's team will bring any indictments related to the Russia probe. This is an investigation that's been going on for well over a year. It started in the 2016 campaign. The FBI opened it. And then, as you know, Robert Mueller took over in May. And it had groups of investigators looking at possible collusion, looking at Paul Manafort, the former campaign chairman, Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, and also looking at obstruction of justice with the president's firing of James Comey and the circumstances surrounding that. And so this is certainly a big significant step and an acceleration, an indication that the investigation has accelerated to a point where they believe they have the case. It's probable cause. You have to show probable cause when you go before a grand jury. So they believe they have enough to at least show probable cause for at least one person who has been under investigation in this probe. And we should also mention that it will be interesting to see what the charges are, because if they have nothing to do with the campaign or Russia, you can expect Mueller's shop to draw a lot of heat, especially from the White House. You heard the president say that this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. And so if this has nothing to do with that, that will be really, really interesting to see. But Mueller has broad authority under the regulations to investigate anything that may arise from the Russia probe. Anderson.
Evan, do you have a sense what the process for this is? You said that, arrests could be made Monday or Tuesday or in that time frame.
Right.
But in terms of what the charges are, is that announced at some point? Does the Department of Justice announce who is going to be arrested, or only after they've been arrested?
Well, our understanding, Anderson, is that that is the plan, is that once these people have been arrested, then the special counsel would make a public announcement about what these charges are and the people who are affected. Again, part of the issue here is making sure you know where these people are, making sure that you contact the lawyers. I mean, in this case, they would probably call the lawyers perhaps on Sunday or Monday and tell them you have until a certain hour to have your client turn themselves in. And obviously, if they don't do that, then the U.S. Marshals and the FBI would try to figure out how to bring them under arrest, and then the procedure would be then to bring them to court here in D.C. in Washington, and then take them to get the charges read to them for the first time in federal court. And I just want to add real quick to what Pamela was just saying. I mean, one of the things, and look, this is not, I don't think this is affecting how Robert Mueller is handling this case, but you got to think, right? If you're running an investigation like this and you're starting to hear Republicans are now starting to say that the time is ticking away and that it's time to try to end this. And you hear the president now sending out tweets about the costliness of this investigation. Look, they do have to do something to show what it is they're coming up with. And I think that's partly what's happening here, is that I think they believe that they have enough evidence to be able to bring charges against at least a couple of individuals, or at least one individual here in this case. And that's what's happening here, Anderson.
Evan Perez, Pamela Brown, appreciate it. I know you're continuing to work your sources. I want to bring in the panel: Carl Burns, Michael Zeldin, John Dean, and Jeff Toobin. Michael, let's put this into perspective for us. What does this mean for the Mueller investigation?
Well, what it means is that he's indicted somebody. We don't know whether it's to the core charge of collusion or whether to the collateral charge of money laundering or tax evasion. What we can surmise from Pamela's reporting, if it was Andrew Weissman who was at the courthouse who was returning the indictment, Weissman has been on the Manafort case, and that it therefore might be logical to conclude that it is Manafort. Manafort has been under scrutiny for both collusion and also for his real estate dealings and for tax and money laundering investigations. So you could have an investigation of Manafort separate from the collusion, but which implicates his dealings with the monies that he earned in Ukraine and elsewhere overseas.
Jeff Toobin, what's your take on this from a legal standpoint?
Well, it's a peculiar situation because indictments are rarely announced without knowing who the defendant is or what the charges are. But it is certainly a major landmark in the course of this investigation. The other point to make is that 2 points. One, in white-collar investigations, usually the first indictments are against individuals that you hope will plead guilty and cooperate against others. You don't indict the big fish first. You indict smaller fishes in hope of getting the big fish. The other point to make is that these white-collar cases take a long time, and it's very unlikely that this case would even get to trial for 6 months to a year. So if anybody thinks the Mueller investigation is going to be wrapping up in the next couple of months, this decision today pretty much guarantees that the Mueller office will be up and running well into 2018, if not through the whole year and beyond.
Michael, do you back up what Jeff is saying, that you go after the smaller fish first in the hopes that they will essentially flip or succumb to pressure?
Well, typically that's the case, but it's not necessarily that this is a typical case. If you look back at Whitewater, for example, they indicted several people for bank fraud. None of them were really small fish. None of them really had anything to say about the president's corruption. But they were significant financial transactions that were alleged and were indicted and were proved, and these guys went to jail. So it could well be that a Manafort or a Flynn or somebody who has dealings on the outside of the collusion gets indicted for that activity. It's been 5 months. Weissman, if it's his case, is a fast-moving prosecutor. And it well then could be, as Jeffrey says, that if it is one of those guys and they are found guilty or they plead guilty, that then they have something more to sell with respect to the collusion inquiry. Because you have to remember, it's collusion and then other things that may arise out of the investigation. So this may be the arise out part, which leads back into the collusion if there's a story to tell there.
Carl, stunning night.
Well, Jeffrey Toobin's got it exactly right. I've talked to some of the lawyers who knew this was coming. They believe that the intent is to get one or more of these people to cooperate and turn over some more facts about what the prosecutors think may be a conspiracy. Whether or not these charges go directly to, quote, collusion, and one of the lawyers, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think collusion in itself is a crime. I think it would have to be part of a conspiracy. But this all goes really to a larger question of possible disloyalty to the United States by helping a foreign power undermine our elections. So there's all kinds of larger ethical, moral, and legal questions raised, and now what we're trying to see Mueller is trying to do is to move this investigation to determine what happened in terms of whether there was a conspiracy to undermine our democratic system.
Paul?
You know, Anderson, in the United States, criminal indictments are usually public things. We keep our criminal proceedings public in the United States. When you see a sealed indictment like this, it almost always happens for one reason. There's a fear that the defendant is going to flee the jurisdiction. Occasionally in big organized crime type cases, you might be worried about a threat to a witness whose name is revealed in the indictment, but I don't think we're going to see that in this case. So this suggests whoever they're indicting, they're afraid he's going to flee.
Laura Coates, how do you see this?
Well, the irony here is quite thick, that the focus of the day has been on the dossier as if that was the only basis for Robert Mueller's collusion investigation, which of course has many, many arms, including Michael Flynn, including Paul Manafort, including Jared Kushner's security firms, including Roger Stone boasting of WikiLeaks. The list goes on and on about all the people who are potentially implicated by this indictment. And so it's a reminder that Robert Mueller is running quite the tight ship, that you have weeks after or months after different investigations are concluded by his team, that you're hearing information, even leading up to today where you've got this sealed indictment. What it's indicating to me is, one, that they are trying to encourage cooperation, but also that their investigation has taken on many different incantations, and one of them being the fact that this may be a tangentially related notion to the overall collusion claim, but that is exactly the precise reason why Robert Mueller has the directive he does. Whatever can come from the initial collusion investigation, he is entitled to work with. And this may be an indication that he's not trying to show his hand because he doesn't want people to be able to either conceal evidence, destroy evidence. It may be the reason that he was able to do a surprise, no knock and announce warrant on Paul Manafort's home. There is an urgency that Robert Mueller is seeing, and it may be a flight risk. It may also be because there are some missing pieces that he's hoping to encourage to come together in this case.
For viewers who are just joining us, the first charges filed in the Mueller investigation, the story just breaking just a short time ago. We don't know exactly who those charges have been filed against or the nature of those charges. We expect to hear that, obviously, in the coming days. Arrests could be made as early as Monday. Lawyers would be notified on Sunday, according to our reporters, or over the weekend at some point. David Gergen, I mean, from what we know at this point, how serious is this for the Trump administration?
Well, it certainly looks like the dam is starting to break now, Anderson, after a long while. I think we're going to be in suspense over the next couple of days until we know exactly what the charges are. If the charges relate to collusion or conspiracy against the United States, as Carl just pointed out, or if they're about money laundering, that's going to send a shudder through the White House, because what that would suggest is two things. First of all, the president has been wrong that there's nothing to this. There's probable cause to believe in Mueller's mind that in fact criminal crimes were committed in that zone, and there's much better chance of flipping somebody if that's the area that where their evidence is taking them. On the other hand, if it's a Manafort and he's indicted for some sort of illegal money transaction he had personally somewhat time ago, and that doesn't, that suggests they've got very little on the question of collusion and on money laundering. So I think a lot depends on what the charges are, as an addition to if it's money laundering or if it's collusion. I think that Jeffrey and Carl are absolutely right. There's going to be a big effort to flip whoever it is who's indicted.
But Jeff Toobin, I mean, if it is some past crime, financial crime from years ago, is it David's saying, certainly the White House will say, well, look, that's nothing about collusion. This is reaching back in history years. Is it possible those kind of charges are brought, to your point, in order to get them to flip and a kind of a smaller fish, charge them with something from the past to get them to flip on what they may know?
Right. People flip because they know they're going to be convicted and looking at serious jail time. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to flip on precisely the issue that they will testify against higher ups. I mean, I know we are in a position here of speculating, and that's not ideal. But I think the precise nature of the charges against whoever this is, one or more persons, doesn't necessarily tell you about the future investigation, the future course of the investigation. All it means is that the Mueller team has found probable cause against somebody or some persons, and they are going to try to win that case or get a guilty plea and a conviction and testimony. I think the precise nature of the charges will tell you something about the direction of the investigation, but it won't necessarily tell you everything that Mueller has learned at this point.
There's one other aspect of this, and that is that it's very possible, and it's been suggested to me by some of the lawyers involved, that Mueller wants to send a signal to other prospective defendants. If this person who has been indicted or persons are facing 20 to 40 to 50 years for whatever these crimes are related to collusion or not, there are others who may be subject to similar charges who have further knowledge about dealings with Russia. And so it may be aimed at these prospective indictees as well, not simply this person or persons who they want to flip. So there are a lot of intentions that the special counsel is trying to convey here, I suspect.
John Dean, we haven't heard from you.
Well, it's not the intent of the special prosecutor here to tease. This is one of the largest independent special prosecutor teases of all time. I think the consensus that is emerging from the conversation is that this is an effort to flip somebody. This certainly seems to be the way to do it. We're left speculating right now, and we'll get a lot more information when we know the nature of the charges. It'll tell us both the status and direction of the Mueller investigation. It'll tell us what the White House jeopardy may or may not be. But it's awfully early still, and Mueller has held his cards very close. So this is a very interesting move.
Michael, Pam Brown talked about this. I'm sorry, Laura, you were wanting to say something.
I was going to say, thank you. To be clear, the idea that the special counsel is simply holding one card to hedge his way into a prosecution is not the issue here. It's not what he's ultimately trying to do. When you charge someone with and you have an indictment, your intention is possibly to convict, not simply to flip. That may be an aspiration of a secondary issue there, but it's not the ultimate goal. But it's very important to consider that even though this is speculation aspect of it, one charge today in a separate case does not foreclose or preclude the person who is indicted right now from being charged in other future cases involving other collusion-related things or perhaps money laundering. So we're not talking about a closed universe of prosecutions right now, so we have to be very cautious about speculating that this would be the end for that particular person. They may be included in many others.
Michael, from your experience, and for our viewers who have just been joining us who didn't hear Pam and Evan's reporting on sort of the timeline of what the next several days holds, can you give a sense of when are lawyers notified that their clients, have been indicted? Are the lawyers, I assume the lawyers are told the charges directly at that point? And when are arrests, how are arrests actually carried out?
Well, typically the arrests should be voluntary surrender in a case like this, unless, as Jeffrey said, there's a risk of flight, and then they'll be arrested and handcuffed. Some prosecutors used to like to handcuff and arrest people in public. They call them perp walks, where they display them. Rudy Giuliani did that a lot. I personally don't like that. I think that if a person is not a flight risk, they should voluntarily turn themselves in. But in this case, they will notify counsel that their client has been indicted, and that will be over the weekend. They will tell the client, the lawyer, what they expect of their client, whether it's to be arrested or to be turned in. The indictments will be unsealed so that the lawyers have a clear knowledge of what their client is being charged with. Then the person will be brought to court, and they'll be presented to the charges, and they'll have to enter a plea in the future after that, and then the case goes forward.
And Michael, we know obviously grand jury, this is the result of a grand jury. Can you just explain how that process works for those who aren't familiar with the grand jury system? How long we know the grand jury? I think there's 2 grand juries going on. How exactly does the grand jury bring about charges?
Well, the grand jury is made up of a group of citizens who are brought in generally for about an 18-month period. The prosecutor only is the person that presents evidence to the grand jury. They meet in the courthouse, and they often meet like once or twice a week. Evidence is put forth by the prosecutor as they build the blocks of the case, and then once the prosecutor has enough information that they think is sufficient to allow the grand jury to indict, they present a grand jury indictment, a draft indictment, and they say, we ask you to return charges as set forth here, and the grand jury then votes yay or nay, and if they vote yay, the indictment is perfected, if you will, and the charges are joined.
And I was going to say also, the thing you have to remember with the information that we have here now is It's possible, yes, that pressure is being used through these indictments to flip lower level people in the case. But it's also quite possible that on Monday or Tuesday of next week, someone like Manafort or somebody else who's been publicly identified in this case will voluntarily surrender with his lawyer, and that a deal may already have been made, and that the indictment is simply going to be handled in a lenient way in exchange for testimony going down the road. So there are an enormous number of possibilities here. We only know that a grand jury has found probable cause, that a crime has been committed, and sufficient to warrant an indictment, and that somebody's going to be brought in. We're really doing a lot of speculation, I think.
But Jeff Toobin, in front of a grand jury, there's no defense, correct? It's just the prosecutor.
Right. It doesn't even look like a courtroom. A grand jury room tends to look like a classroom where there is a witness stand, but the prosecutor runs the show, and the jurors sit classroom style and are allowed to ask questions often, sometimes directly, sometimes through the prosecutor. It is something that is very much controlled by the prosecution. There is no defense attorney. The witnesses are not allowed to have a defense attorney in the room. And a grand jury does not have to be unanimous to issue an indictment the way a jury has to be unanimous to reach a conviction. They need only to have a majority. So an indictment is not, tantamount to conviction. I think people should be very much aware of that. Just because someone's indicted doesn't mean they're guilty of anything. But obviously, it is not a step that responsible prosecutors take unless they feel like the case ultimately will end in a conviction. And certainly, the very experienced group that Robert Mueller has surrounded him with is well aware of that, and they would not be bringing this case unless they thought they could put it in front of a trial jury.
Laura Coates, would the attorney or attorneys for one person or two people, however many have been indicted, would they, I know they haven't been notified, but would they have a sense that this was going to be happening? And would they have a sense of the information that had been presented to the grand jury, since they're not in the grand jury room?
Only if the people who were actually witnesses before the grand jury somehow indicated or told them they were. The whole premise of a grand jury is to operate in secret, which of course is very different than what happens in a trial, where you don't want the notion that people are able to be convicted behind closed doors and not in the public eye. You want the protections of a judge who's not present in a grand jury scenario. So if the witnesses themselves somehow were able to disclose or chose to disclose information, then they would have an inkling into whether or not their client was going to be indicted or what information they would have. But the whole premise is to operate in secrecy in order to have the subpoena power be most effective. Because the most important notion or role of a grand jury is to have subpoena power over documents, over people, to be able to come in and testify. So without that secrecy, you do not have the ability to have as much access to everyone else. So it would not be in the interest of the prosecuting team to have it disclosed, but a witness is able to disclose information if they choose.
I do think that the attorneys will see this coming, because when you're under investigation, subpoenas are issued for your bank records, and it's your friends who are being subpoenaed to the grand jury. And prosecutors may even have told you, the attorney, that your client is a target in the investigation. So I think most certainly whoever is the attorney for the client in this case saw the indictment coming.
Michael, I think, was that you saying you want to say something?
I was just going to add what Paul added, which was that normally you'll get a target letter. If you're the target of a grand jury, meaning you have a likelihood of being indicted, you get that notification. And I don't think that anyone who has received a target letter would be under the assumption that Bob Mueller is sending that to them just for the fun of it.
David Gergen, from a political standpoint, again, a lot of this will depend on actually what the charges are that have been filed. And again, to those who are just joining, we do not know what the charges are. That has not been announced. Nor do we know, or I think saying who who charges have been filed against. But how does the White House play this? I mean, if it is not something to do directly with Russia, if it is a past allegation of a crime, if it is a past charge for money laundering or some sort of tax fraud or financial impropriety, what does the White House do from a political standpoint? Did they attack this?
Well, Anderson, that again goes to the nature of the charges. If the charge comes back against a Manafort for his personal, unrelated to the White House, financial transactions in the past that somehow, violated some federal laws, I think the White House is then going to go on the attack. They will treat this as a weak opening move by Mueller. If the first thing he brings in is something that's unrelated to the president and unrelated to the collusion in Russia charge, that makes it easy for them to say, we told you there wasn't much here, and look what he's come up with. He's had a massive investigation to come up with a mouse. On the other hand, if he comes in with something about collusion, that's much more serious. And if he finds something, frankly, about money laundering by the Trump team, and put aside Manafort, if the Trump team has been in money laundering, there have been a lot of rumors among people in New York and the investment community that at the end of the day, that's what this is going to come down to. It's going to be much more about money laundering. Those two things should put a scare into the White House, because that means he's building a case that could be very much land on their doorstep and indeed come inside the doors of the White House. So I think in that situation, I would assume they will try to discredit Mueller in a variety of ways. They will find friends to do that. I would assume that they have had some kind of game plan to do that if something serious comes down.
Okay.
But they're going to treat it a different way. It's going to require a much more imaginative communications plan, frankly.
Well, Michael, let me ask you, if you are on Mueller's team, or if you are Robert Mueller, and you are aware of that, there's the legal case you want to make, and then there's also obviously this politicized environment. How much does that seep into things? How much does that do you take that into account?
I don't think Mueller will take much of the politics of this into account. Bob is a pretty serious guy who faces facts as he sees them and then makes decisions about those facts. I think that if he has indicted somebody on a collateral matter, let's say hypothetically, it's a Manafort for his personal business dealings with Ukraine. And that's what he's indicting him on